There was that ever so fateful fumble from Indiana late in the fourth quarter, I guess in the middle of the fourth quarter to Cincinnati. Welcome to This Week in Indiana Football. I'm your host, John Alden, along with Dustin Schutte, as usual, from Saturday Tradition. Today, we will also be joined here in a little bit by a guy from WKU, one of my friends back whenever I was at WKU as a college student, Kaden Gaylord. He covers the Hilltoppers, and as you all know, that is Indiana's opponent this week, traveling down to Bowling Green. So we'll be discussing that here in a little bit. Dustin, a crazy week in Big Ten football. How are you doing? What do you think of this past weekend? And just give me your thoughts. It doesn't have to be about Indiana necessarily just yet, but what was your overall thoughts of the weekend in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was entertaining, right? I mean, we had a good game, even though it wasn't maybe quite the turnout we expected in Bloomington or thought we would get a better performance of. It was still an interesting game. And you look, we had the whiteout atmosphere at Penn State. I don't care whether you're a Penn State fan, an Auburn fan, or just a college football fan. That was an awesome environment that they created up in Happy Valley. And we got a great game there. Michigan State went down to Florida and beat the hell out of Miami, a ranked Miami team, and now they're in the top 25. Michigan did its thing. Ohio State has some question marks still. Purdue played.
And that's one that I'm surprised at, because you seemed very confident that Ohio State was going to come out and completely blow Tulsa out of the water in that one.
I thought for sure, and I think that there's some extenuating circumstances that made that not happen that people are kind of ignoring. I thought that Ohio State would come out pissed off and just ready to take it to Tulsa after that loss to Oregon. But I think what we learned after the game was Ryan Day made some changes to his defensive play calling. Kerry Combs is not calling the defense anymore. They're going a different direction in that regard. And so I think there was an adjustment period. I mean, that doesn't speak to why the offense kind of had some hiccups and had some trouble getting going against Tulsa, but I think it speaks to the defense. So at least there was a reason behind Ohio State not putting Tulsa away and winning that game by 56 points and that being a four-quarter game. So I thought a little bit better after it, but this is a team that's got some major question marks. I'm still not ready to slam the book on Ohio State because it's Ohio State. But
and it's week 3. I think we're still in the realm of overreactions. And speaking of that, I know Indiana. I think I'm ready to go ahead and jump into this a little bit. I 100% know that Indiana had a very disappointing second half in particular. Maybe you could even say 2.5 quarters, because from the moment Micah McFadden out, no matter how much his impact was, I mean, the game was changed 100%. And if you're supposed to be an elite team, if Indiana is supposed to be considered an elite team, your defense has to be able to to get stops even without your best player. And I think for the most part, they did do a good job. But Micah McFadden's absence, for some reason, Indiana as a whole wasn't able to do what they wanted to do on offense or defense from that moment forward. And I know that kind of got off on a tangent, because I started off talking about an overreaction. But I've seen so many people, whether it be national media outlets, the fan base, I guess maybe a little bit of myself, I don't know, that once again that the season's just done. And I think, and before I go any further, Dustin, I'll let you give your side of this, because I know you have less of a biased opinion than I would. But what do you think you don't have to tell me what's wrong with the Hoosiers, but what has to happen for them to get back on the right track? Or do you think that this is a team that's going to continue trending downward?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer at this point, because you haven't seen a lot. And let me go back. I want to talk about the game first before I dive into this. I want to talk about –
That's the hardest thing, because I've been thinking about this all day. I have not known where to gather my thoughts, because there's so many things, whether you want to talk about Michael Penix, whether you want to talk about the fumble on the 2-yard line, whether you want to talk about the good parts of the game, because
there were –
my mind is going so many places, and I don't want to jump to too many things at once. But yeah, let's just talk about. I guess we can start at the game. What happened specifically?
Yeah, so let's start there, because we're going to go – we can go sporadic, because it's kind of hard to define what all happened in the course of that 60-minute game. But let me So we talked about, there's no question that the Micah McFadden call, whether you agree with it or whether you don't agree with what happened, and I don't. I think it was a bad call, number one. And I think targeting is a let the kids play in the game. That's my opinion of it.
Like, call the penalty, but don't take him out. That's what you're saying.
Yes, correct. I don't care about the 15 yards. Your defense don't toss a kid out of a game for one mistake when it's an accidental issue. Like, you can tell when somebody's headhunting. That wasn't the case. Anyway, what we're talking about is a non-factor if three things happen. If Tom Allen kicks a field goal, I can't remember what possession it was on, but I believe it would have given Indiana a 10-0 lead.
Yes.
Early in that game. Yep. You get another possession. You go up 17-0. You got a 3-possession lead, and then you're in complete control of that game. If Michael Penix doesn't throw an interception inside the red zone, and then if Tim Baldwin Jr. doesn't fumble inside the red zone, we're talking about 17 points in that game. Let's say everything else the way, Indiana wins that game mathematically by 3 points.
Yeah.
You have to capitalize in the red zone. To me, that's what I understand. There's a lot of people that are going to say the momentum changed with Micah McFadden. Yes, you're not going to get an argument from me. But
they could have won without the momentum shift too, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is, if you capitalize in the red zone, you're going to have a chance to, even if you get 10-17, you still would have had a chance at the end of that game instead of being down 2, only down 1, and you don't have to be nearly as desperate as they were at the end of that game. So to me, the red zone issues, the inability for the offense to capitalize on those 3 possessions was a bigger story to me than McFadden getting tossed.
Yeah, and I totally agree there. It's just that's where everyone's mind goes right now.
Right.
Because that was the first time. It's with me watching specifically. I tend to be an optimist, but it was the first time where I was genuinely concerned that things were changing. I mean, Cincinnati got 10 points in about 2.5 minutes before the half ended, which is crazy to think because most people probably thought it was going to be 14-0 going to halftime.
But there's another thing, and this is where it comes back to the offense for me as well. And the reason that McFadden play was so big is obviously you lose one of your best defensive players, probably one of the best defensive players in the Big Ten, and also it was a third down. So we're talking about Indiana getting a stop and forcing. I don't know if they were in field goal range or if it was in punting distance. I don't remember where they were on the field. Regardless, you're going to get a stop instead of getting a stop. Now they have momentum. Now you lose your best player. They have momentum and they get a first down. So that was but again, let's go back to the end of that first half. If Indiana just sits on that ball, if they just run it and say, we're content to run out the clock and Michael Penix doesn't throw that interception, that's another 3 points in favor of Cincinnati. Because then you go into the half up 14-7 instead of 14-10. And in a game like that, where you're playing a ranked team and you have to do things correctly, you have to play a near perfect, maybe not a near perfect game, but when you have to play really well, those little things matter. Field goals matter. That play mattered because that shook Michael Penix. He did not play well the rest of that game.
And speaking of Michael Penix, excuse me, there goes me talking. Before the show, I was telling Dustin, I tend to rely on building my voice power or pressure, whatever you call it, up by chewing gum. And I'm feeling the after effects of not chewing gum prior to coming on here. Just a little tidbit I felt like sharing. But Michael Penix, that's the other thing. Obviously, in week 1, he threw 3 interceptions. And I remember talking back then, there was blame outside of Michael Penix on some occasions for some of those interceptions. Going back and looking at the 3 picks he threw against Cincinnati, that was all his decision-making. And I don't know what's going on in his head still. And a lot of people asked questions about that during his press conferences today, during Indiana's press conferences. Michael Penix wasn't one of the people that was there, but either Nick Sheridan or Tom Allen, something is still not sitting right with Michael Penix. And I don't think the coaches necessarily want to come out and say that he's having mental problems with coming back from his injury and getting his confidence back. But I think it's clear at this point that something is off, and it's keeping the rest of the offense from clicking. Ty Freifogel, the Penix to Freifogel connection was non-existent. I think there was only one completion. There could have been one that was deep. There was another one that could have been crucial later in the game. I don't remember how late in the game. But there were several big drops that Freifogel couldn't hold on to. And that's a connection that you never saw or a misconnection that you never saw last season.
Right. I think that there is some hesitation, and we have talked about this. A lot of people were curious about Michael Penix's health coming into the season, and he said he's 100% ready to go. A lot of other people said, yeah, he looks like he's at full strength. He'll be ready to go. And I don't doubt that from a physical standpoint. Like I'm not going to question that. He knows his body better than I know his body. He knows his body better than anybody else would. So I'm not going to question his 100%, his comments about being 100%. Where my mind goes, though, is what's going on in the back of his mind when he gets hit, when he's under pressure? Because when you've gone 3 seasons and you haven't completed a full season, that has to stick in the back of your mind. You can't, I don't want to get hurt. And if you're thinking about other things, that's going to affect your performance. I don't know whether that's the cause or if the injury bug is still there. I don't know what the cause is, but he's not playing well. He doesn't look like he's not making good decisions. The offense doesn't look like it's helping him out at all. The offensive line has played poorly. I think there's just a number of factors going into it. Like you look at the stat column and Michael Penix has the 6 interceptions, but it's not all on him. He takes the brunt of that responsibility.
Yeah, obviously he's been forced out of the pocket to have to make those decisions, but on some of those interceptions specifically, he could have just thrown those out of bounds. And you're not giving an extra possession to Cincinnati or Iowa, whoever it may be. And obviously that's something that he's going to have to learn going forward. And the offensive line, that's another completely, totally different issue. I remember you talked last week about how even though Indiana looked better with the rushing attack against Idaho, they only had 3.4 yards per carry. That didn't change hardly at all with this game against Cincinnati either.
No, I didn't suspect it would. They haven't been able to run the ball for a while.
But here's the other thing, too. In the first quarter of that game, they were on pace to get over 300 rushing yards. And it was one of those, I don't know if they were just feeding off of the crowd and everything was just going their way early on. But both lines, offensive and defensive, were able to control the entire game. Desmond Ridder, he didn't look like a Heisman candidate, period, that entire first quarter and a half.
No. And that's where he got a little momentum was when after that targeting call, after they, got the first down after being stopped on third down. That was a huge momentum because you looked in that game and even on the television screen, Desmond Ridder was frustrated. He was upset with his teammates, with the coaching staff. He was, I don't want to call it a tirade, but he was not happy on the sideline. Like it looked like he was losing it. And so that's when I was like, this game might be over because if you're is that frustrated and we're only in the first quarter, he's not going to play well. But all they needed was something to click. And like we said, that McFadden play was huge. But at some point, if you're Indiana, you have to channel back to what was successful. You have to channel back to what you were able to do to get Cincinnati off the field, to hold them to zero points through 20 minutes of that game. So to me, Indiana had complete momentum. They had complete control. And then, like we said, that's a momentum changing play. But I still think Cincinnati's offense got going. Let's give them some credit because they were able to get into a rhythm. But I still think that a majority of this comes down to Indiana's offense and not being able to capitalize on some of those opportunities. Early in the game, it's always hard to tell because you have a first series drawn up. Sometimes it's hard to stop. The defense doesn't know what to expect. So you kind of let that go through the process. And Indiana did that really well. The game, it's kind of the same old story. We've only played 3 games, but it's kind of been the same old story. They couldn't run. They're forcing too much downfield. They're putting too much on the pressure of on Michael Penix, and he's trying to force passes.
Now, excuse me. Now, before we bring in Kaden, I did want to address something that I always read your Big Ten power rankings, quarterback rankings that you release, and also your overreactions. I think this is from your power rankings. And we'll try to piece this real quick before we bring in Kaden. Excuse me, man. I really should have drank some more water or, like I said, chewed that gum.
Always have that bottle of water.
But here's what, for those listening or watching, what Dustin said about Indiana. And he currently has them ranked 11th. I don't think that's too far off. I think I'd put them somewhere more around 8 or 9. But let's just get into what Dustin said in his little column, I guess, about Indiana. Let's just call it like it. Well, I know it's a whole article, but like a column about a paragraph, whatever you want to refer it to as. But he goes like this. Let's just call it like it is. Indiana isn't going to be a Big Ten contender this year. I am comfortable agreeing with that at this point. I wouldn't have said that prior to the Cincinnati result, but I agree with you there.
And here's the thing, too. That's not a complete Indiana because the Big Ten East. Look at Ohio State,
of course.
Penn State, Michigan State. Rutgers is undefeated. Maryland's undefeated. Like this. So Indiana, to me, if to prove they were a contender, to me, they'd have to be 3-0 or at the very least 2-1 and have a competitive game against Iowa.
And I agree there. And so moving forward, the Hoosiers laid an egg in the opener against Iowa, then allowed Cincinnati to come back after building a 2-touchdown lead late in the first half. A combination of poor decision-making by Michael Penix Jr. We just talked about that. And poor play calling. Did you hear the announcers? I don't know if you were watching or listening to the, or I guess watching and then hearing the ESPN announcers. They made the comment saying that Nick Sheridan was pitching a gem of a play calling game for Indiana. I don't know that many Indiana fans or people watching football in general would have said that Nick Sheridan on any given day so far this season has thrown a gem of play calling.
No, I don't think so. And I just think about, again, you got to get your quarterback in good position. And based on what we've seen from Michael Penix right now, him throwing down the field for those 20-yard pickups consistently has not been good. And for some reason, they try to stick with it. And I understand you want to have confidence in your quarterback, but at some point, you got to scrap that. You got to try to figure out something else that's got to work. So to me, and then again, that decision to go for it when you could have kicked a field goal, that was huge. I mean, I think that was because again, you're talking about a 3-possession lead potentially going into halftime, depending on how the rest of that game turns out. So it was an equal responsibility in terms of, or a lot of parties were equally responsible for that loss. When you build that kind of lead and you had that kind of momentum, you can't let one play affect so much.
No, absolutely. And here's the last part, and this is the part where I feel like I almost completely disagree with you. You say IU still has the talent to get back to bowl eligibility, but right now this team doesn't look capable of competing with some of the top teams in the conference. And I know that they don't look like that they don't have the talent sometimes, but they were obviously in that game with Cincinnati. And I think regardless of what the results have been through 3 games, you can't deny the fact that the talent from last year is still there. They're not performing to their standards, but I absolutely think that no matter what their record ends up being, they can absolutely compete with any team in the conference still.
On defense, they can't on offense. They can't.
But okay.
They can't.
So far, though.
So
you don't think DJ Matthews can be Penix's new top target? I mean, even though other receivers outside of Matthews and then obviously tight end Peyton Hendershot specifically this past Saturday, you don't think that them and then if Freifogel gets going that the passing attack can't get back on track?
Who are they going to move the ball against? You're not going to playing the way
definitely against Ohio State. And I know our buddy Kaden coming in. I know he covers WKU, okay. But I know he's an Ohio State fan. And we'll bring him in here in just a couple seconds. But
I'll give you Ohio State.
What's crazy is of all teams, they should be able to move the ball against Ohio State.
Yeah, you're correct on that. They should be able to move the ball in Ohio State. But Penn State, good luck. Michigan, good luck. Michigan State is not great, but look at they shut down Miami in the second half of that game. Like they make plays.
But they're also having quarterback problems with De'Aaron King, similar to how Indiana's dealing with the struggles of Michael Penix right now.
Okay, and did you see what Michigan State did when they had troubles with De'Aaron King? They won by 21 points.
Fair point. All right, we're going to go ahead and bring in Kaden Gaylord from Western Kentucky. He covers the Hilltoppers on the College Heights Herald as well as on WKU Red Zone Radio. Kaden Gaylord-Day. Where'd the day come from, Kaden? How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I recently changed my last name this past summer. So at the end of June, early July, we just changed it.
Okay, cool. So obviously you've been sitting in the lobby listening to Dustin and I talk about Indiana's struggles against Cincinnati. And obviously WKU, supposedly from what I've seen and heard people talk about, right now has the best passing attack in college football. And I know that that's only a small sample size, but it's something that I think Indiana fans have to worry about. What are your early impressions just of WKU period from what you've seen through 2 games? They've already had an early bye week, haven't they?
Yeah, they had the bye this week. Obviously, compared to past seasons, this passing attack is the best that I've seen it since I've been here at college, since I've been here at WKU. Bailey Zappi, I mean, he could throw the ball. He could sling the ball. It's like we're watching NFL. Like, really, we're watching the Rams play, or we're watching some West Coast team play from the NFL. I mean, they can really sling the ball. Jared Stearns, he's a great receiver. Only played 2 games, but yet almost has 300 yards in receiving. I mean, the passing attack is the focus of this team, and they've been able to execute it very well for these past 2 games.
Dustin, do you have something?
Well, I'm just curious. I don't know much about Western Kentucky, but they beat up UT Martin, I believe, and then they played really well against a really well coached Army team that presents all kinds of problems to just about any team it plays. So I'm curious, based on what we've seen out of Indiana through the first 3 weeks. To me, this is not a game where Indiana is going to be able to just roll out its helmets in Bowling Green and then walk away with a victory. I mean, do you get that same sense?
Oh, most definitely. I, like John said earlier, I'm an Ohio State fan, football wise, and Big Ten football is not the greatest. Sorry for the diss, but I don't see how Indiana can come in here and expect themselves to come in and just whoop WKU. I mean, WKU's defense is very suspect at times, but I think their offense can power them through to get that victory.
No, I don't think, at least in the current state, because I say this almost every week, I feel like, especially after a bad loss, the Indiana football fan base is very fragile. And thankfully, they've been able to have a good crowd through 2 games, a lot of that based off the fact of how good they were last season. But I think right now, with the way that they collapsed against Cincinnati and the fact that this game is in Bowling Green, it's something that fans, and myself included, are concerned about, especially seeing how high-powered the Hilltoppers are right now. During the early years of Tyson Helton, they struggled to get back to the offensive prowess that Jeff Brom helped create down at Bowling Green. So, and it seems like Clay Helton's finally, not Clay Helton, Trace, what's his brother's name?
Tyson
Helton. There we go. I said it earlier, but I'm getting them confused because I know that they're coaching siblings. Clay Helton obviously out at USC now, or gone from USC now. But I definitely think that Tyson Helton's been able to get that offense back on track. And I think Indiana, unless they're able to play good defensively like they did in the first quarter and a half against Cincinnati, if they don't play that well and if they don't have any ridiculous targeting calls, I think they'll give WKU some fits. But at the same time, they don't want to get in a shootout with this team.
No, not at all. And I think where Indiana's focus should be is, trying to get WKU to run the ball, because the Hilltoppers haven't established a run game at all this season. I mean,
neither is Indiana, so
they have barely ran the ball at all. I mean, against Army, they only had, I think, 33 yards or 42 total yards running the ball. Their leading rusher was Noah Whittington. He had 8 carries for only 33 yards. UT Martin was a different game just because it was a blowout, so I don't really count that. But yeah, they just haven't established a running game, and if the Hoosiers are able to get WKU or if they're able to keep them from passing the ball like they've been doing, then Indiana should have this game under control.
And this is where
go ahead, Dustin.
I was just going to say, it's where I do think that, again, I say that I don't think they can roll their helmets out, but I do think that Indiana has the ability to control the game, because when you look at the athletes they have in the secondary and at linebacker, I still have some questions about their defensive line, but Western Kentucky, I don't think, can just expect to go out there and throw the ball around. I think Indiana's too good defensively. I think that they'll pick off some passes and create some momentum. So in my mind, that's where the game can really get away. As you mentioned, they're going to have to establish some sort of run game, because I think Indiana's secondary is really good. And it's almost like the opposite of the Iowa game. We knew that Indiana could not pass on Iowa's secondary. If they were going to go out there and throw 50 times for the game, they were going to lose. I feel like that's going to be the same case here with Western Kentucky. Even though that's a strength, it's kind of strength on strength, and I just think Indiana has better athletes heading into this game.
For sure, and that's what Tyson Helton said earlier today, actually. He's like, I'm just going to flat out say it. I think Indiana just, they have better players than us. But yeah, for sure. I think it comes down to WKU's depth at receiver, because I feel like Indiana will focus on stopping Jared Stearns because he's one of the best receivers in the country statistically right now. And okay, let's make them figure out who else they're going to have to beat us. Who else can beat us? Like WKU last year said they were really deep at receiver, and I don't think that's true at all. But this year, I really believe that they're actually deep at the receiver position. In the Army game, there's this guy named Mitchell Tinsley, and he didn't do anything for the first 3 quarters of the game. And all of a sudden, in the fourth quarter, it was the Mitchell Tinsley show, and he was mossing everybody. And I feel like that's, something they're going to have to do this game. Jared Stern's obviously going to get a lot of attention, so somebody else is going to have to step up. And I think that will be Indiana's game plan going into Saturday.
If WKU is to pull off this upset, what do you think is going to be the deciding factor? And obviously the passing game will be a presence, but something that's maybe going to be an additional factor for WKU. And I know you talked about the running game, and maybe that's your response, but what should make Indiana fans nervous if this game's close going into the third or fourth quarter?
I think time of possession is the key to the game, because Army doubled WKU in time of possession 40-20, and WKU lost that game by 3. I mean, they scored 21 in the fourth quarter. If they had the ball more, they would have won that game. So I think time of possession will be the huge key factor of this game. WKU's defense has been kind of suspect this year. They're giving up 270 yards rushing per game. And I didn't believe it until I looked it up. In the UT Martin game, they gave up over 200 yards rushing. And I get like WKU blew them out or whatever, but at the same time, 200 yards rushing to UT Martin, that's not good. And then obviously when they played Army, they gave up 300 plus rushing yards. So I think that is an area that Indiana can attack and, attack the run defense and keep the ball to keep it out of the WKU's offense hands. So I think time of possession is where Indiana should look to win the game.
So this looks like the game, and Dustin, I'll let you go here in a second, the game that if Indiana is going to learn how to develop their run game, that this is the one to do it. And it makes sense. You're a Big Ten team playing a Conference USA opponent. Your offensive line should be able to easily overpower a Conference USA offensive line or defensive line. And plus, you've said they've had some struggles already. So it looks like if Indiana really wants to show that they're trying to improve their run game and their offense, period, that it's going to have to start right there with Stephen Carr and Tim Baldwin and all their guys. And then, Dustin, what do you got?
Well, I was just going to – but that's been the problem. They rushed for 3.6 yards against Idaho. They cannot run the damn ball.
I'll tell you what, Idaho didn't – or I know Idaho is an FCS opponent, but they didn't score, period, on Oregon State this past weekend, who I would say is a much inferior opponent than Indiana. It's so hard, these early games. I feel like every week I'm finally going to get a clear-cut idea of how good or bad Indiana might be, but it seems like every week I've got a new question of some sort.
Well, so this is what I'm going to throw then to Kaden, is because to me this is weak. This could be where the game is decided, because it might be weakness on weakness, and whoever takes advantage of that. Because if Western Kentucky can't stop the run and Indiana can't run the ball, my God, it's going to be ugly. But if one of those sides steps up, I do think, based on what and I haven't watched hardly any, but looking through the box score, looking through these numbers, seeing a few highlights, I do think that Western Kentucky on the offensive side can cause some problems. So if Indiana, I have no faith in Michael Penix to get the job done. Which is crazy, is that going into the season, you would have thought if any Big Ten quarterback, if you would have faith in any Big Ten quarterback, it would have been Michael Penix. Correct.
And it's completely flipped the script after 3 games.
Right. And so this is where I'll throw it to Kaden. Do you have any faith that Western Kentucky could stop Indiana's run I haven't seen that aspect of it. So is there any faith? Is there any semblance that they could even just slow it down?
I think so. I think, with the bye week and them having that time to actually prepare, sit down and watch Indiana play, they definitely have prepared for that this week. I have not watched Indiana play personally. I watched a little bit of the Cincinnati game when Cincinnati kind of took over at that point, but then I turned it off. But I saw that Michael Penix, he's just been terrible for the year. And me and John did Red Zone radio while John was here. I was a freshman. He was junior or senior. And He's always been about Indiana. So I follow him on Twitter and everything. I see all of his tweets and all of his complaints and all that. And I'm just like, dang, is Michael Penix Jr. that terrible? So, I mean, if it's like that, and I've seen that he's only throwing like 46% pass completion and stuff.
Well, and in 3 games, and you can just throw out the Idaho game because that's an FCS opponent. Against good competition, he's thrown 3 picks per game. Right. And if WKU has an opportunistic defense, I don't know what your all's turnover margin looks like right now, but this is the perfect time to keep Penix rattled because he's going to have to get his confidence back in this game.
And I think that's another thing is Indiana has played stiff competition. Their 2 losses are against stiff competition. So I kind of take that into account when I'm thinking like, okay, they played against Iowa. They played against Cincinnati, 2 great teams in their respective conferences. Like, now they're going down to play a Conference USA team. So maybe Indiana will be able to work the kinks out. Ty Freifogel, I always say his name wrong.
He's got an interesting name. Indiana's got a very colorful cast of characters. And one of my favorites to say is Sio Nafoa Gatatoa on the defensive line, I believe.
The fact you say that right is amazing.
It took a while to learn, but I'm pretty sure he's from either Hawaii or one of the islands out off the Pacific coast. But Indiana's had an interesting cast of characters. Sorry to interrupt.
No. I think this is the game where Indiana could be like, okay, let's get Ty going. Let's get him going along. I mean, I saw he had major drops in the Cincinnati game. I think he only has 10 catches right now. 23 total targets is what I have written down, and 123 yards. So maybe this is the game where they look to attack the secondary because WKU secondary hasn't been the best either. So I think this is the game where they look to be like, okay, let's get Ty going. Let's get him going for the season. So that can be another thing as well.
Dustin, got anything else?
I mean, I think he's answered all my questions. I mean, to me, this is where Indiana should be able to. I'm not saying Western Kentucky's a bad opponent, but you look at the talent on both sides of the ball, and Indiana should be able to flex its muscle and maybe not blow them out, but get a convincing win. But I wonder again about the mentality. Excuse me, the mentality going down there after you've lost the 2 biggest games to start your season. Your only win is against an FCS team. Does that start to play with your mindset a little bit? And if things don't go right, I mean, the fact that I don't think it should be glossed over that this is a road game. Like that to me is a bad deal for Indiana. Maybe they go down there and they win, 48-20. I don't know. But I think that is a factor. If things start to go awry, if Western Kentucky, let's say they score the first touchdown or, it's a tough first quarter, being on the road, having those 2 losses in the back of your mind, having those 6 interceptions through 2 games in the back of your mind, I could see this kind of spiraling, even though we think Indiana has superior talent. I'm just saying football's a mental game.
It's the Penn State effect. It's the Penn State effect that we
That's
a
great example. A great example. Yes, 100%.
WKU won't have 100,000 in the stands, but it is parent weekend, John. It is parent weekend, which means
good way to get people in the game. And I saw it's a blackout too, I believe. If y'all get enough people, that could look pretty cool. But 2 more things from you, Kaden, before we let you go. One, I want to ask you, you being an Ohio State fan, what are your thoughts on Ohio State through 3 games?
Man, it's been.
I don't know if you were expecting that. I just kind of
no. It's just like man. This year is just. I mean, I don't know how good you are, how much you know lingo, but Ohio State is looking very mid this year. I mean, defensively, it's not great at all. Oregon ran it down their throats. It's just not looking great. It's like with Clemson. Clemson doesn't look good either. It just might be one of those off years for these teams who usually are great, but not this year. I mean, it's like last year in college basketball. It's like you didn't know who was above, like who stood out the most. Gonzaga was out there a little bit. But this year is just Alabama. Well, it was Alabama till the Florida game, but it was Alabama and then everybody else. Ohio State just does not look great. I don't think CJ is that great of a quarterback either. I mean, the numbers say different.
He's a young guy. I mean, he could be a good quarterback. He's just young.
Yeah, of course. And the numbers say different, but the eye test, it's a little rough for them so far, but I think they still win the Big Ten because I don't believe in the Big Ten football at all. I mean, it's always been Ohio State's league, and I think it'll forever be Ohio State's league.
So it's interesting. Dustin, maybe we got a little bit of a talking point before we let Kaden go. Dustin, you've been all over Twitter today talking about the different comments that SEC media members have been making about whether it's Paul Feinbaum or Greg McElroy or however you say his name, talking about how Penn State would be the fourth best team in the SEC West.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Here's the thing, okay, and I'm not going to go on this soapbox tangent. I'll save that for another day because I've already been through that. My point is, we can get to a point where we could probably debate what the best league is. And I'm not going to argue if somebody says the SEC is the best conference in college football and has been for the last couple of years. You look at the national championships, you look at the college football playoff appearances, we can agree that the SEC is probably a step above the Big Ten. It's not so far ahead that one of the two best teams in the Big Ten would be fourth in one of the divisions. That's not the case. Now, in a random year, that might be the case. What is also frustrating is, let's imagine if Auburn would have won that game. How much the narrative would have changed in the sense of Auburn goes up to a tough, hostile environment in Penn State. They got a big road win. That's a top 10 Penn State team. They might be the biggest challenger to Alabama in the SEC West. But because Penn State wins that game, instead we come back with, well, Auburn isn't really that good this year. Penn State, they're okay. They might win 7 games. Maybe they'll get to 8 wins. You never know. So to me, it's not even so much. It's just, I don't care if people say the SEC is the best conference. You can make an argument for that, absolutely. But to think that the best teams in the Big Ten would be at the bottom of the SEC, that's what really gets me going. And I'll get off that soapbox now.
I understand completely. Like, I am a Kentucky homer. I'm from Lexington, so I'm a big UK guy as well. In terms of Penn State and Auburn, when Bo Nix is your quarterback, I don't really care. Bo Nix is not good.
Your Bo Nix takes over the years have always got me going.
I do not like Bo Nix at all as a quarterback. I think he's absolute garbage. But besides that, I think it also, you have to take into the fact the last time Penn State played an SEC team, I believe, was when they played UK and in the bowl game, and Kentucky won. So I think, the connotation around Kentucky football, oh, they're not that great. Oh, 1 year, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
So I think that also takes into effect when people are like, okay, Big Ten football wouldn't do that great in the SEC. I mean, the best team or the second best team just lost to Kentucky in the bowl game.
One thing I had said to Dustin, it might have been last week, I wish in football they would do like what they do in basketball in the non-conference season. I wish they would do some sort of like Big Ten versus SEC challenge where they match up just 1 week. And if you do something like that, schedule cupcakes for your other non-conference games. I don't care. But I think it would be great television to do some sort of challenge between the Power 5 conferences just for 1 week per year.
I think the SEC would be scared to do that.
Oh, and of course, that's the thing. The SEC loves where they're at. The SEC loves where Kaden, I love your takes right now because you seem very realist. You know the SEC is the best, but you understand where they stand in terms of they love their throne. They don't want to have to risk being taken off of that throne as the best conference.
They would have would have no benefit. They would only have everything they would only lose from that. There's nothing to gain, basically.
It's like how Kentucky basketball won't play Western Kentucky basketball because WKU has everything to gain, UK has everything to lose. It's kind of like that similar.
And they've argued the same thing. Like, why is Indiana going down to Bowling Green to play this game? And obviously, this game was scheduled back when Indiana wasn't improving upon their, status as a Big Ten opponent. They were more of a cellar dweller. But it's still weird to see a Power 5 team. And I know Vanderbilt's gone into Smith Stadium over the years, but they're the SEC bottom dweller. And so it's weird to see. Kaden, I got one more thing for you before we let you go. Go ahead and if you want to give me your score prediction or outcome prediction for Indiana versus Western Kentucky.
Man, See, I want to say a high-scoring game. I really do. I think Western pulls the upset. I really, truly believe Western Kentucky pulls the upset.
That's not where I thought you were going with this after our discussion earlier, but go ahead. Do you have a score?
WKU averages around 40 points a game. They're not going to reach 40. So I'll say 38-31 Western Kentucky.
Wow.
Well, there you have it. You've got Kaden Gaylord-Day here with us right now here on This Week in Indiana Football. He's picking the Hilltoppers to go for the upset over Indiana. And my goodness, if that happens, and I'm not saying that it won't, it most certainly can happen. I don't think it will, but if that happens, I think it's safe to say that the Penn State effect really is coming into full effect with Indiana this year, because 1-3 with a loss to a Group of 5 team, things won't be looking good for the Hoosiers if that ends up being what happens this weekend. But Kaden, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. Maybe we'll have you on again sometime, and good luck to the Hilltoppers this week. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Dustin, I know you don't really know me, but John has known me for years, and we did pick'ems at Red Zone, and I won every single time. So I may sound crazy.
Here's the thing: me and Kaden were always on top, and right now Dustin and I are doing pick'ems as well, and Dustin's got a 4-game lead on me right now. But we're keeping our pick'ems exclusive.
Yeah, I'm in good company here.
We're keeping our pick'ems exclusive to Big Ten game or type games involving Big Ten opponents, not necessarily conference games. But thanks again, Kaden. We'll talk to you later, man.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So there you have it. Once again, Kaden's picking the upset. Dustin, were you a little surprised by his pick there?
I was, because I thought he made a lot of great points. But again, I think that there's a fact of what's the mentality? What happens if Western Kentucky comes out and punches Indiana in the mouth? It's a road game. There's a lot of things that are working against Indiana here. So I wouldn't be as bold to say I don't think Indiana's going to lose this game, but it's not impossible. Like, I think people need to realize that if Western Kentucky can get into a rhythm offensively and cause some havoc, I think the one thing you take away from, and we harped on this, was the positive for Indiana last week was Cincinnati had a lot of trouble getting going. Once they got going, they finally started clicking. So if Indiana can cause that same sort of issue early in the game and then capitalize on offense, run the ball, get Michael Penix, get some easy completions going, try to stretch the field, I think Indiana can put enough distance in between themselves and Western Kentucky where they get to a win. But if Western Kentucky comes out, like I said, if they score first, I'd be really frightened if I was a Hoosier fan.
Now, I don't know if I would necessarily be frightened with an early score. I feel like it's easy to get up to think that it's or get all hopped up on something like that. I think fans will likely, if that were to happen, whether it's a touchdown, I don't think they would freak out over a field goal. But if they throw a deep ball into the end zone or something like that, you're going to see fans turn on the team on Twitter. It's going to be a horrible sight to see. And I mean, if it's close in the fourth quarter, I still don't think fans, anybody will be satisfied if this game isn't more than a 3-touchdown victory.
Correct, because you were supposed to be.
They're only favored by 9, which I think is crazy.
Well, I mean,
actually, let me back up for a second. It's crazy to think that that's the line when maybe 3 weeks ago I would have expected it to be about 21, 22 points.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a fair assumption. Yeah, the 9-point spread to me, I mean, that's just, people bet with their hearts, they bet with their eyes in terms of they bet on the jersey, basically, is what it boils down to. And the way Indiana's played, and you look at the box score, right? That's what happened. You got beat by 28 by Iowa. You got beat by 14 by Cincinnati. People who didn't watch that game don't know that, so they don't think that Indiana's a very good team. So I think the 9-point spread is probably right about on where it needs to be. But, I mean, to your point, yeah, coming into the season, you would have thought that would have been a 3-touchdown or, at least in the high teens type of spread.
And they'll definitely want to look good because the following week they're heading into Happy Valley for a 7:30 p.m. night game. I don't know if it's going to be a whiteout. Do they only do that once a year? Okay, so at least they don't have to worry about that that aspect of it. But I mean, nonetheless, if Penn State's still rolling, you can still expect that to be a hostile environment for Indiana, especially when you consider the fact of what happened last year.
Well, that's what I was going to. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You better bring a lunch, because Penn State. There's two teams that I would not want to be this season, and that's Indiana and Maryland, because Penn State is out for blood in those two games. So if Indiana, if they play like they did against Iowa or Cincinnati, they're going to get rolled in that game. But
in that game, I mean, unless Indiana loses to WKU, obviously, but
right.
I think the Penn State game specifically right here and now, that game is going to tell if Indiana can be bowl eligible for one, or if they can even take that even further and maybe get back into the conversation of winning 8, 9. Well, I guess 10 would be winning out, but 8 or 9 games would be the realm of success I think that this team anticipates right now, like from the inside of the team. I'm not necessarily saying the fan base is saying that, but I think the team thinks that they can go in and, I mean, obviously they want to win every game, and I'm sure they believe that they can, but that Penn State game is going to be the gauge for the rest of the season, I think.
Has there been a recalculation of your expectations at all at this point? Because to me, okay, I said this before the season started, and I've been guilty of not kind of living up to this. But again, when you look at the historical aspect of Indiana football, they've been bad for. So the thought that we're talking about a team that could get to a third straight bowl game.
But you can't. I know that'd be great. But here's the thing: this Indiana team with this talent does not want to play in the Foster Farms Bowl.
Understand that?
You know they don't.
Look at who they have to play. They still look at the teams that they're going to have to play. They still have to play Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State.
I mean, they're back after this WKU game. You've got 3 straight ranked opponents as long as Michigan State stays as hot as they are.
So there's 4 games, and then again you look: Maryland 3-0. Rutgers,
Michigan,
3-0. Purdue, 2-1. Who's the other crossover game?
Minnesota,
2-1.
I mean, there's 0 gimmies left. 0.
Correct. So this is where I'm saying we were talking about Indiana getting to 8 or 9 wins, maybe 10 wins and challenging. To me, that's out the window. I still think if they get to 6 wins and then get the monkey off their back of winning a bowl game, even though the expectations were at 8 or 9, even though we talked about this team being a challenger in Indianapolis, I think when you look at who's left on the schedule, how well these teams have played early in the season, 6 wins is still an accomplishment. But you have to get this win. You have to get Western Kentucky. I know we talked about Penn State. You have to win this game. Otherwise, if you get upset, this team will not go bowling if they lose to bowling.
Oh, I definitely think a loss with the WKU or to WKU is a trigger for ruining the rest of the season. Yes. I'm not saying that they couldn't come out of that, but you have to win this. But this isn't the gauge game, but it's definitely a game that if the worst of the worst happens, then you're in for a lot of bad things, I would think. But it's tough. I'm a Michigan State believer now. I wasn't really a Michigan State believer, and I thought they were going to beat Miami, but I didn't think they were going to beat Miami the way that they did.
Yeah, and I didn't either. I mean, they pummeled them, and they have the thing that's scary about Michigan State to me is their defense isn't playing great. That still has some holes, but they're playing good enough to win. And you look at what they're doing offensively. They're running the ball extremely well. I think they're averaging like 260, 265 yards per game, somewhere in that area. Kenneth Walker is a monster. I mean, he could be a Heisman contender. Jaden Reed is a really good wide receiver. Jalen Naylor is flashed. They still have Elijah Collins and Connor Haywood. Peyton Thorne is playing really well. I mean, they have playmakers all over the field. Couple that with the fact that their offensive line is actually blocking people, and you have an explosive Michigan State offense. The defense doesn't have to do a lot. I mean, they've played great, don't get me wrong, but if Michigan State can continue to play as well as they have offensively, they're not probably going to win the Big Ten this year, but they're coming. And they're going to beat a lot of teams, and they're going to beat some ranked opponents. They've already beaten Miami, but they'll beat some more ranked opponents on that schedule. So, I mean, I thought Michigan State would be the worst team in the Big Ten this year, and I am eating crow on that because my goodness, they not only are they. It's not like they're just winning these games by 2 or 3 points and like, oh, maybe that team's not as good as we thought. They are clobbering teams. They've beaten every team they've played by at least 17 points.
Yeah, it's nuts. And I guess with that, we'll go ahead and jump into our preview of next week as well as making our decisions. There's not too many intriguing games on here, I will say. I only had trouble picking 2 of these when I was going through them earlier. It's not to say that I could still be wrong about the ones that I'm confident about, but obviously you expect a week like this after having a historic week last week where 5 teams were playing ranked opponents. So starting off, and we don't have to talk necessarily about some of these matchups, but more about how the teams have looked so far. First off, Villanova at number 6, Penn State, an FCS opponent. So I think it's safe to say we're picking Penn State on that one, especially with coming off the win against Auburn.
The big thing for Penn State is just get out of that game healthy.
Yep, that's the thing. These are glorified exhibitions when you play these FCS opponents. They just count towards your record. Bowling Green at Minnesota. Man, Minnesota is probably my surprise team from this past week because, one, I picked Colorado to win that game, and I was basing a lot of that off of how well they did against. They didn't beat Texas A&M, right? They only lost by 3 is what it was.
Yeah, 10-7 was the final score.
Yeah, but Minnesota comes in and wins 30-0 on the road without Mohamed Ibrahim.
Yep.
So I don't know if that shows how bad Colorado is. I don't know if it shows how iffy Texas A&M could actually be or how good Minnesota actually is. But
combination of all 3.
Yeah. So I once again, I'm going with Minnesota on that.
Yep, I'll take the Gophers too.
However, they did struggle against their last MAC team, Miami of Ohio. So, I mean, who knows?
I think Chris Ottman-Bell's back. The passing game wasn't great, but it was better last week. Trey Potts can carry the ball. They'll be fine.
Next up, we have Ohio at Northwestern. Northwestern, they ended up losing that game to Duke, and they barely came back and made it a game. It was almost a blowout. And you made a comment on Twitter, and I want to address, and I think it's spot on. Northwestern year in, year out is just the most confusing team in the Big Ten because they're never what they're supposed to be. Never. And the beginning of the season, it seems like they go through the same thing every year where they're either looking way better than they're supposed to be or they're looking way worse than they're supposed to be. And right now it's the latter.
Yeah, well, the weird thing is that after what we saw in 2018 and 2020, it was like people were scared to pick against Northwestern because I mean, they find a way to win. That team, I didn't think was really good enough to win a Big Ten title. Played really well against Ohio State in the championship game. So what you're seeing, though, is I think if people were realistic and not just wondering what kind of Fitz magic was happening in Evanston, they would have probably picked Northwestern last because they lost their entire linebacker core. They lost Greg Newsome. They lost Peyton Ramsey. Drake Anderson and Isaiah Bowser both transferred out of the program. Cam Porter, their running back, was hurt. Like they've got nobody. And it's
Peyton Ramsey, who you claimed was the best quarterback in history, I think, on Twitter as well.
Northwestern was 3-9. He comes in, they go 7-1. They get to the Big Ten championship game. They 7-2 when you count the Big Ten championship game loss. They beat Auburn in the Outback Bowl. He's gone, and now they're 1-2, and they have an ugly loss to Duke, and they got steamrolled by Michigan State, and they only beat Indiana State by 17, 18 points.
24-7, I believe. And the whole Hunter Johnson – go ahead.
Oh, the Hunter Johnson thing is crazy, but I was going to get to the point of I'm still picking Northwestern to beat Ohio.
And I am too. I actually, there was a third game that I kind of struggle with, and it's because I don't know how bad Northwestern is. And I also saw Ohio's 0-3. So that was kind of what took me over the hump for that one with Northwestern. But Hunter Johnson, one of the biggest mysteries in quarterback college football, because I believe he was the number 1 prospect out of the state of Indiana at Clemson, or went to Clemson, and then he's taken a detour to Northwestern. And he was the starter once in that the 2019 year and was horrible then. And it seems like nothing much has changed now. So there's Northwestern. Moving on to Colorado State at number 5, Iowa. Once again, another pretty poor-looking group of 5 opponent right now. Colorado State has been decent in the past, but right now not so much. I think Iowa should probably pull this one out fairly easily.
Iowa's going to cruise. We'll see if they get another defensive score. 3 for 3.
Next, and this was one of the 2 games I was referring to that I kind of had to think about for a second. And maybe we'll see in retrospect next week if it was worth thinking about. But Rutgers at number 19, Michigan. And it's just interesting because, yes, Michigan's played Washington. Maybe Washington isn't really that good. This might be Michigan's first time playing an opponent that could keep it close, I think, with Rutgers and the Schianos, the Fighting Schianos.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know much about Rutgers either, but what we do know is they're able to create turnovers. I don't know if they'll be able to stop that run game. I think Michigan is just too talented. I don't think Rutgers is a bad football team. I just think Michigan's high level. We might get some answers.
Rutgers has given Michigan fits several years in a row now, I feel like.
Well, several years in a row.
They didn't win last year, did they? Was it last year?
Last year was the year they gave them fits. No, Rutgers before then was giving nobody fits. Okay. So
I guess I'm just thinking that Schiano's been there longer than 2 years, because I know Chris Ash was notorious for losing 70-0 to multiple opponents or something along those lines.
Yeah, so they should have won the game last year, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I do think that Rutgers is going to play hard, and I think they're going to keep it close. But I think Michigan, it's still going to be a 2-touchdown game.
Yeah, I ended up going with Michigan as well, but we'll have to see. Well, it'll be telling. I mean, it's really the only intriguing Big Ten versus Big Ten matchup this week. So we'll see how that goes. And maybe this next one I'm about to say could be intriguing, but I'm not really thinking so. Illinois at Purdue.
For me, Illinois, both teams are banged up. Both teams have been dealing with injuries. I like Purdue's passing attack. And we saw what Maryland was able to do against Illinois. Maybe Illinois comes out with a little bit of a fire because they're 1-3 and they're kind of fighting to get back on the right track. Purdue wants to bounce back after a loss to Notre Dame. Purdue can't really run the football. That's another thing. That's another Big Ten team that can't do that. So it'll be interesting.
It feels like – I'll finish your thought. I need to get better at not interrupting people. My goodness.
I think Purdue – comes out with a win in this one, but I think Purdue's favored by like 11.5. I don't think that it's going to be that. I think Illinois is good enough to keep it close, but I think Purdue gets to 3-1.
I have Purdue winning as well. And what I was going to say, it seems like now we are so far removed from when it was evident that the Big Ten was like the class of college football for good running attacks. Mm. And I don't think that. Obviously we would have had Mohammed Ibrahim, but without him. Maybe Ohio State with Travion Henderson and Master Teague, but who else has a decent? Well, Kenneth Walker III, the newbie from Michigan State, obviously. But there's not that class. Do what?
Are you asking who's got a good rushing attack in the Big Ten? My friend.
Are you about to school me?
Michigan State with Kenneth Walker.
Oh, you were just talking about Michigan's running game. I haven't watched any Michigan this year. I will
Wisconsin
say that.
With Ches Malusi and Jalen Berger and Isaac. I can never pronounce his last name. Guerendo or Guerrero. I can't pronounce his last name. I'm going to apologize to him right now. I'm sorry. I can't think of his last name. Iowa with Tyler Goodson. They played 2 really good defenses. Who am I leaving out? Even to an extent, Nebraska doesn't run with running backs, but Adrian Martinez can run. So they're Travion Henderson, as you mentioned, Penn State, Noah Cain, John Lovett, Devin Ford.
I guess it's there.
Teams that can run. It's just the problem to me is the teams that can't run. I usually go off on a tirade about them because I don't understand why they don't recruit offensive linemen.
Are you referring to Indiana not recruiting offensive linemen?
Well, Indiana, Purdue.
Well, here's the thing. Indiana used to have a solid offensive line. Jordan Howard and Tevin Coleman were able to do wonders because they had a decent offensive line. And I guess what I was getting at, I was thinking too much along those years because back when what I was referring to, Tevin Coleman and Jordan Howard were a part of those big running back classes in the Big Ten. And being the bias that I have, and I will work on this, I apologize for not having, an accurate statement just a second ago. But Heck, I'm losing my train of thought.
Do not
Evidently, the Big Ten
rushing attack. I didn't even mention Trey Pop.
Yeah, but whatever. And I know Wisconsin's been known as running back U, and I just haven't been on top. I know they had Jonathan Taylor, they had Monte Ball, they had I know they had somebody in between those two that I'm not thinking of either.
Corey Clement, John Clay. There's another. I can't think of who I'm forgetting.
Who's between Monte Ball and Jonathan Taylor? I know there was.
There was Corey Clement. He was in there. Was
he? Maybe there was multiple ones in between. I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. I was trying to save myself from embarrassment with my running back comment. So anyway, moving on to Kent State at Maryland. Man, I just hate going through this slate. We know who's likely going to win. Unfortunately, the last week you said on Twitter that Kent State has the ability to beat Indiana with the way that they were giving Iowa fits early on.
They were. I mean, they scored a touchdown. Indiana didn't do that.
That's true.
This actually is an intriguing matchup to me because I think Kent State is an underrated team. Well, maybe not underrated, but I think that they are a better football team than what they'll be given credit. I think Maryland has too many athletes, but I think this is going to be a close game.
Yeah, and once again, Big Ten versus MACtion. So we've seen Big Ten lose to MAC opponents before, but I don't think this will be one of them. I'm taking Maryland as well. So far, I think we've got a clean sweep with a few games left. We got next Nebraska and number 20 Michigan State. A game that I feel like Nebraska fans probably would have been confident about a few weeks ago, but now and probably a lot of teams would have been confident about playing Michigan State a few weeks ago. But that could be a good one. But I'm taking the Spartans on this one.
I'm taking Michigan State too, and I thought that the best bet of the week, if you're a bettor in terms of in the Big Ten, I thought that Michigan State minus 3.5 was one you wanted to hammer. For this reason, look, Nebraska's defense can keep them in this game. There's no question. That defense is
really they did well against Oklahoma.
Exactly. This defense can keep them in the game. Offensively, I have no faith. Their special teams is not good. That was the difference in that game. And there's also a factor of kind of history under Scott Frost at times, not every time, but at times, Nebraska has played really well, whether it was a win or a loss, and followed it up with just kind of a game where you're like, what the hell happened? So that's until you prove to me that you can play more consistently on a week-to-week basis, that's why I think that this is a bad matchup for Nebraska, because Michigan State is rolling right now. And I haven't seen much consistency from this program from week to week under Scott Frost. And so for me, I would take Michigan State. And as long as that's within a touchdown of the spread, or the spread is within a touchdown, I think I would take that.
Yeah, I would too. And our friend Jeffrey the Greek, I think, said it best. I saw it somewhere. I don't know if it was his podcast or somewhere else, but Nebraska just beats itself with miscues and special teams problems. And Indiana honestly did the same thing this past week against Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. So Nebraska and Indiana, the comparisons are there. That rivalry that doesn't exist but seems to kind of always exist in our minds. It seems to kind of be still there. So moving forward, Akron at number 10, Ohio State. Akron, as far as I think last week, and this may have changed, or certainly hasn't changed by much. Akron is supposedly the worst team in college football at the FBS level. So this is the game. If Ohio State's going to run up the score, it's going to be this game.
Yeah, I think they probably will. UConn, by the way, is the worst team in college football, but Akron might be second.
Here's the thing. We don't claim UConn as a part of the FBS or maybe anything. UConn is its own thing. They don't want to be in a conference, or I'm sure they want to be in a conference. But they're so out of sorts in every way, shape, and form. I don't think the NCAA should claim UConn. They should either let them play in the FCS or tell them to stop playing football altogether.
Yeah, well, they might drop down. I don't know, but I think
UConn shouldn't be the worst program in college football, but that's just the way that it is with all of their problems.
Right. I totally agree. So to answer the question, Ohio State by a lot.
I mean, I'm talking about UConn. That shows the importance of this game between Ohio State and Akron. Next up, Indiana at Western Kentucky. We already had our friend Kaden take the Hilltoppers. Obviously, he covers WKU. He knows them better than we do. But I'm going to go with the Hoosiers. I don't know. I really don't have a score prediction right now. I think it's probably going to be between 14 and 20 points, somewhere along those lines. I don't know if it'll be a shootout type of game. I think it would be better. Well, I guess I don't know what to. There's every week we're talking about something different with Indiana. And if Indiana wants to get these different, and I know you said monkey off your back, but I feel like right now they got about 6 or 7 different monkeys on their back because it seems like every week there's a new problem that we're talking about. But Indiana can start to right their ship once again, as we talked about going into the Idaho game. If they can run the ball, if Michael Penix can have a good game and look confident doing it, and if the defense continues to do what they did during the first half against Cincinnati. That is how Indiana starts to look like how they're supposed to look.
Yeah, I mean, try to figure something out in your run game. Try to make life a little bit easier for your quarterback. Like I said, we can sit here and complain about how Michael Penix has played, but it does not fall all on his shoulders. It's on the play calling, it's on the run game, it's on the offensive line, it's on the coordinator. Obviously, some of it falls on him. He's making the decisions. You got to get your wide receivers open. So, to me, as long as you're not shell-shocked, I think it's all about the game up here mentally more than the game on the field. If Indiana rolls into that game, does what it's supposed to do, it has the talent, I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I think Indiana wins this comfortably. I'll go with a 34-13 type of score. I don't think Indiana's offense is dynamic enough to put up 45 or 50 points, but I do think their defense is good enough to, if Western Kentucky is that bad at running the football, and if Western Kentucky is planning to throw, I think it could look a lot like what Iowa did, but in Indiana's favor, where you pick off losses, you get your team in great field position. It could even look a little bit like that Idaho game. I just don't see the scoring quite there. But to me, I think Indiana wins this game comfortably, 34-13, and maybe you generate some momentum heading into that Penn State game.
We'll have to see. Our last one, our game of the week, and I believe College Game Day, once again heading to a game involving a Big Ten opponent. We got number 12, Notre Dame, number 18, Wisconsin at Soldier Field in Chicago. So far, Dustin, you and I have 0 differences. This is the one where, obviously, since there's not too many big games, one that I thought potentially we could have a difference here. I don't think, knowing you, that we're going to have a difference on here. But I'll just go ahead and say I think the Badgers are going to finally give Notre Dame a loss. Notre Dame, even in the game against Purdue, they looked a little better than they have against Toledo and then Florida State. But Notre Dame does what Notre Dame typically does, and that's win close games and get to 12-0 so they can sneak into the college football playoff. I don't think that happens against Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin gets the win.
If you ask me this every day, I'm probably going to change my answer. The reason is because I have no faith in Wisconsin's offense right now. They do have a strong rushing attack, but you look at that Notre Dame defense, it's really good. They shut down Purdue last week. I think that Notre Dame's defense can cause just enough problems for Wisconsin. Wisconsin's defense is really good too, and they're getting back Leo Chenal, probably their second best linebacker, behind Jack Sanborn, and he's probably one of the best defensive players in the Big Ten. So I do think Wisconsin wins this game, but I'm not going to be shocked. Like, I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it's going to be a really hard-fought game, low scoring. I think it's going to look very similar to the Penn State-Wisconsin game in Week 1. If you're Graham Mertz, take care of the ball. Don't turn it over. That has cost them dearly. That cost them dearly in Week 1. They had another couple miscues in the red zone against Eastern Michigan. You've got to clean that up if you want to compete for a Big Ten title. So I do think Wisconsin does enough. I think their defense is good enough to get a win, but they have got to show improvement offensively. I think having an off week last week helps that.
Yeah, and it very well could. And so I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens this weekend. And that's going to wrap it up for another week of This Week in Indiana Football. Thanks again for listening, as always. Be sure, I haven't said this yet, listen to Indiana Sports Beat Monday through Friday on YouTube, 9 to 11. Also on the Ref and WBRO in the afternoons, 1 to 3. Guys, I'm going to get better at this. I know sometimes I feel like I don't do a good job at gathering my thoughts, and I want to do a better job at that. Thanks for those of you who have been sticking with us through our early years, and thanks again, Dustin, for joining me as always. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's always fun, John. We'll do it again next week.
Well, we'll see what happens. Indiana versus Western Kentucky. Thanks for listening. It's been This Week in Indiana Football. We'll see you next time.